So it's fantastic to be with you this morning. It's fantastic to be here, whether you're joining in the building or whether you're joining online. It's great to share in this time with you. My name's Jude. I'm one of the interns here this year, for those of you who don't know me. As you can hear, if you don't know me, I'm not from around here. I hope you can understand me okay. Someone this morning before the 9 o'clock came up and asked me if there was going to be subtitles during the sermon. There wasn't subtitles then, and unfortunately there's not going to be subtitles now. We're going to be looking together in Mark chapter 5 this morning. If you have a Bible, if you could turn it on or turn to Mark chapter 5, and the stewards are going to hand out some Bibles just now as well. If you need a Bible, just signal to a steward and they'll get one to you. So we're into our 5th week in our series looking at Jesus through the Gospel of Mark. And for the last 2 weeks, we have been looking at Jesus' authority, the authority he showed when he was here on earth. Firstly, Maria, 2 weeks ago, guided us through Jesus' authority over sin, looking at the story of the paralyzed man, how his 4 friends brought him to Jesus, expecting healing and looking for healing. But when they brought the man to Jesus, Jesus gave him more healing than he could have expected. Jesus looked at him and he saw a more serious problem in his life first to heal, and that was his sin. Jesus forgave him for his sin, showing that he had authority over that sin. Last week then, Malcolm preached on Jesus' authority over nature and how, because Jesus was there at the beginning of creation, and not only there, but how he was working in that and how he was part of that creation process, that he has the power to change every atom in order to bring that storm to cessation, in order to calm that storm. This week, we've gotten off that boat that had been filling with water, and we've stepped onto a piece of land that's home to some seriously evil forces, which we're going to look at. And these forces were intent on causing destruction and depravity and devastation and death. So we're going to look at that now. We're going to read together from Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus coming from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out, and they entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man and the one who had the legion sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demon begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. God always blesses the public reading of his inspired and his infallible word. And he is doing the same, and will do the same this morning. But let's just set the scene here. In chapter 4, we see Jesus teaching people. We see Jesus telling great crowds of people parables about the kingdom of God, and then explaining to his disciples in private afterwards what these things meant that he had been saying. According to his disciples, he was a fantastic teacher. He was a teacher who was able to teach with authority and with liberty far greater than his social background would have allowed or people would have expected of him at that time. His disciples thought he was an amazing teacher, but then one day they step into a boat with him. And as they're in awe of their great teacher getting into the boat, a windstorm arises. And it starts to batter off the boat, and it causes waves. And as the waves are banging off the side of the boat, water starts filling the boat, and the disciples get really worried. They go and they tell Jesus, who is sleeping on a cushion, they tell him, they say to him, "Do you not care that we're perishing? Do you not care about this storm? Do you not care about us?" I don't really know. When they went down to Jesus, I don't know what they expected him to do. But Jesus comes up to the boat, and he says to the waves and to the wind, "Peace, be still." And there's a calm comes over the weather. And Jesus does this to show that he has authority over nature. He has authority over the weather. But what's the disciples' response to this? Terror. The NIV says they were terrified. They were afraid, first of all, because of the storm. But then they were terrified because of Jesus' power, because they've seen Jesus' power and authority to calm that storm. Now, in this passage that we've read, they've got out of that boat after possibly one of the worst experiences up to that point in their lives, possibly one of the worst experiences in their whole lives. And what happens? They get a couple of days rest and recuperation to recover from this awful thing that's happened? Absolutely not. They get off the boat and they're shaken and they're afraid and they're nervous and they're possibly tired from what has just taken place. And in verse 2, it says that immediately there met them a man out of the tombs. This man that met them was a crazed man, naked, bruised, cut, dirty, howling, screaming, scary man. It's the last thing they wanted to come across now. Matthew's account of this same event records that this man was so fierce that no one could pass by that way anymore. That's how fierce he was. You could say that the disciples have jumped out of the frying pan and jumped straight into the fire, or into the burning hot furnace, in this case possibly. But as we look at this, I want to look at three things in this passage. First of all, I want to look at the man, what he was like, what had caused him to be the way he was. I want to look then about his encounter with the Son of God, with Jesus. And lastly, I want to look at two different responses that we see at the end from the villagers and from the man himself. So first of all, I want to look at the man. I wonder, has any of you ever seen a TV program called Neighbours from Hell? You have? Hands up how many people have seen it. So a few of you have seen it, so you'll know what the premise of the show is. But for those of you who haven't seen it, the premise of the show is that people come on the TV and tell people their experience about living next to the neighbour from hell, the neighbour who always causes disruption, and the neighbour who's always out to cause harm. And that's what these people tell. But this man is the original neighbour from hell. And as I've already said, he's the last thing the disciples want to see and come up against when they step out of the boat. This man has been oppressed by demons. He's been possessed by demons for I don't know how long, but he's in a very bad way. He's become a social outcast. Excuse me. He's become a social outcast. And so much so that the place where he lived, the villagers tried to bind him with chains and with shackles, but to no avail. He always found the strength and the power from somewhere to break free from the chains and the shackles and go about tormenting and torturing the villagers until they just couldn't take it anymore, and they drove him out from where he was living to live among the tombs. When Jesus comes across this man, when they meet, Jesus asks the man, "What's your name?" But the man, being so oppressed by these demons, doesn't have control over himself, and the demon answers for him. This man is nameless, and he remains nameless through the whole passage. We don't find out here what his name is. But the demon answers for him and answers Jesus and says this, "My name is Legion, for we are many." A legion is a military term for a regiment of soldiers up to 6,000. So the question is, why did this man answer in this way? Why did the demon answer in this way? Was he trying to intimidate Jesus by saying there's so many of us? It's very possible. But equally, Jesus had authority over these demons, and they knew it. So there would have been very, very little point in trying to deceive Jesus in this way. The fact that this man had been driven to live amongst the tombs is very interesting as well, because this is where the villagers would have taken their dead to be buried. When that happens today, we call it laying someone to rest. But this man found no rest. He didn't find any rest among the tombs. He was dead, but he wasn't dead physically. He was dead spiritually. And he was constantly tormented by this demon and these demons that had oppressed him and suppressed him in life. And they were there, as we see, to cause destruction. They weren't there for any good. They were there to cause complete destruction of this man. And this is what we're told is the aim of spiritually evil forces at this time and today as well. Jesus himself said this in John chapter 10, verse 10. "The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy." You see, there's a very real battle going on in the world today. A battle that we can see, a spiritual battle between the spiritual forces of evil and God, the spiritual force of good. And it's a battle for your life, and it's a battle for my life, and we're all involved in that, whether we realize it or not. We're all involved in that battle as well, because Satan wants to take our joy. He wants to take your courage. He wants to take your faith. He wants to take your hope and your trust, and he wants to do that either himself or by demonic power. And he was doing it successfully to this man. And we can see the devastating effects. This man's life was in complete ruin. He was completely and utterly oppressed. But then he has this confrontation. He has this meeting with the Son of God, with Jesus. And we see in this part of the story, at this meeting, that the spiritual battle comes to a head. The spiritual forces of evil come almost face to face with the Son of God. The spiritual forces of evil hiding behind the body of a man. And we see they know who he is. When these forces meet, when this confrontation happens, the demons know who Jesus is. I don't know at this point in history if the disciples themselves knew exactly who Jesus was, how great he was. I don't know if they still just saw him as a great teacher. But the demons knew exactly who he was, and they addressed him by his name. They said to him, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" It's interesting that we see that they bow down. When they meet Jesus, they fall down, they bow down. The Greek word used there means to worship. These demons worshipped their spiritual superior. It's an interesting thing as well to note that this man who had been bound and broken free from chains and from shackles on an unspecified number of occasions was now instantly and totally restrained by the powerful presence of the Son of God. That's a powerful thought. The presence of Jesus restrains evil. Jesus confronts the demons and casts them out successfully because he has authority over them. And we see a picture here of light overcoming darkness, which will, as a thought, we'll come back to in a minute. But Jesus, as the light of the world, overcoming the darkness, the spiritual forces of darkness that he comes up against. But it's also a very interesting thing in this passage that we see the demons begging Jesus in the conversation. Twice they beg him from verses 10 to 12. First of all, they beg him that Jesus won't command them to leave the country. And second, he begs Jesus that they could go into a herd of pigs. The question is, why would they beg Jesus for these things if Jesus didn't have authority over them? It would make absolutely no sense. But they have to beg him for two reasons. The first being they were scared. In Luke's account of this same story, they beg him saying this: Do not command us to depart into the abyss. They knew Jesus could do that. And the second reason they had to beg him was because they knew he had complete and total authority over them. And when he commanded them to do something, they had to do it. They didn't have any option. You see, you don't usually beg someone for something unless they have authority to do something differently from how you want it done. A child begs its parents for something because they know the parent has authority over the child. They know the parent has authority to decide what to do. But this demon, even though he's begging Jesus for these things, he still is determined to cause as much devastation and as much destruction as possible. So when the demon submits to Jesus because he has no option, and Jesus grants the demons that they may enter the pigs are overcome and rush down a steep slope and into the sea, and they die. And this isn't a small thing that we see. It's not a few pigs going into water and drowning. This is a herd of 2,000 pigs. This is a massive herd. It's not a small thing. And this was possibly the village's main source of income, these pigs. So it's definitely not a small thing here. But Jesus grants the demons to go into the pigs for two reasons. Because one, when they hit the pigs, the true destructive intention of Satan and of demonic forces is revealed. These intentions are still the same today, and we've looked at them already: to kill, to steal, and to destroy. The second reason Jesus grants them to go into the pigs is because when they hit the pigs and the pigs go running down the steep slope, it's a very powerful visual illustration of what has just happened. It's a very powerful demonstration of Jesus' authority over demonic forces. Why did the demons want to go into the pigs? Was a question that I had. Possibly because they wanted to still cause Jesus as much harm as possible. They wanted to wreck his reputation and ruin his reputation in the village. But I don't exactly know why. They wanted to go into the pigs. But for a minute, I want to go back to that battle between the light and the darkness that I've already touched on. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul explains this spiritual problem, this spiritual battle to us. He tells us that the God of this world, Satan, is determined to do everything in his limited power to keep people in spiritual darkness, to keep people in a state of perpetual spiritual death. Excellent, I got there in the end. This constant state of spiritual death. But the problem for him in this is that the light always overcomes the darkness. The light always overcomes the darkness, and it's been like that from the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, we read that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. We see it here. From the very beginning, God spoke light into the darkness and then separated the two. And Jesus still does that today. By the power of the Holy Spirit, Jesus still unveils the darkness that people are held captive in, the darkness that the enemy wants to hold you in, and releases you into the light. John tells us in John chapter 1 that the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. And the amazing thing is the darkness never will overcome it, because the darkness can't overcome it, because Jesus is more powerful than the darkness. The light of the world is more powerful than the darkness. Zara and I were on holiday, my wife, were on holiday a few years ago, and we decided to go to a set of local tourist caves that were there. So we went down deeper and deeper into the caverns of those caves, and the tour guide told us that no natural light could penetrate into these caves. And to demonstrate this, she turned off the lights, she flicked the switch, and it's the first time that I can remember being in complete and utter and total darkness. I had no bearing point. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I couldn't see the people who were around. I couldn't see anything. And it was so dark, it was so much so that there seemed to be no hope without the light of getting out of that cave again. There was no way to tell where you were stepping. If you were going to step into a massive hole, if you were about to fall into a cavern pool, there was no way to tell anything. There was simply no hope of escape from that cave on my own. But then the tour guide flicked the lights back on. And immediately when she did that, the light overcame the darkness. The hope returned of getting out of the cave. The light immediately overcame the darkness. But it's Satan's aim to keep us in that darkness. It's Satan's aim to veil us from the light and to veil us from the power of the light. It's his aim to keep us where there is no hope, and even where we don't think we need to have any hope. But there is hope. There's hope in the light of the world. There's hope in Jesus Christ. When you go into a room and you flick the light switch on, it shines in the darkness. The darkness can't overcome that light. But you have to flick that switch. The light doesn't come on if you don't flick that switch. Other people have helped us to get out of that darkness. Other people have helped us to get out of that cave, to see the light that is Jesus. And now it's our turn, if we have seen the light, to draw people out of the cave, to help people get out of that darkness. You see, we read in Genesis 3 that in this great battle, there's one winner, there's one victor. God said to the serpent, to Satan, "I will put enmity between you and the woman. You will bruise his heel, but he will bruise your head." That was Jesus casting the fatal blow, and Jesus has cast the fatal blow in the battle that releases these captives, that releases oppressed people into freedom, just as he has released this man from oppression and into freedom. Jesus has secured the victory for us, but we have to claim it. We have to take back the ground that the enemy has stolen. We have to play our part in releasing captive lives. And we have to claim the victory and the freedom from oppression and the power of Jesus Christ. And we have to do that today. Jesus has the authority to overcome spiritual darkness. And he has told us to go and do it. He's told us to go and share the light. He's told us to go and speak life into death and light into darkness. This man couldn't heal or restore or deliver himself from the destructive, oppressional, humiliating forces that had gripped his life, that had grasped his whole being. He needed the authority of one not only greater than himself, but he needed the authority of one greater than the oppressor. And Jesus had that authority. The amazing thing is, Jesus still has that authority today. Jesus has that authority to overcome the spiritually dark forces and the spiritually dark powers that try to restrain you today, that stand against you today. Jesus has that power to deliver you from oppression you have felt in your life. And Jesus has the power to restore your life to complete wholeness and to completeness. This man's life was restored, and he's now free from the oppression and from captivity. But why? How is he now free? Because he had a personal and a powerful encounter with the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He had a powerful encounter. He was transformed. He was renewed. There was a complete difference in this man after his encounter with Jesus Christ. And this is demonstrated in the contrast between the original description of the man being naked and being insane even, to now the description of the man being clothed and sitting in his right mind. Jesus has the power to completely transform you. When you have that personal encounter with Christ, you will never be the same again. Paul is a fantastic example of that. The persecutor turned apostle. He had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus when he saw the blind in the light. And Jesus spoke to him. And after that experience and after that encounter, Paul was never the same again. So much so that he went from being a captor of Christ followers to being a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's an amazing thing, that encounter and that transformation. And Jesus can do it for every one of us. So we come to the final part, and we come to those responses that we see at the end of the chapter, the passage here. This man has now been released from the demonic power that had oppressed him, the demonic power that he had been captive to, and he's sitting sanely in complete awe of what has just happened. The herd of pigs are now in the sea. They're dead. The herdsmen fled back into the village to tell the people what had happened, and the villagers had come back out to see this man, to see Jesus. And we see two responses. The villagers came and they saw Jesus there. They saw the man who had been delivered from the evil power. But they didn't see the importance of the deliverance of that man. They only saw the devastation of the drowned pigs. And they begged Jesus to leave. They don't want Jesus to stay. It's interesting that, first of all, these people had driven the demonic oppressed man out from where they lived because of the power that was in him. And now they drive Jesus away as well because they see that Jesus is even more powerful. They see that Jesus has even more authority and that he has the power and authority over the demonic power that had enslaved the man. And they're afraid. They're afraid of how Jesus, if he stayed, would change their lives and would transform them and renew them. They're afraid. The second response, however, it's not a response of fear, but it's a response of complete and utter and ultimate commitment. The man begs, who has been released, begs to be able to go with Jesus, but he can't. He's been oppressed for so long, not able to make up his own mind about things, but now he chooses to surrender his life to Christ and asks to go with Christ, but he can't. He can't go for two reasons. Jesus refuses the man for two reasons. One, Jesus himself has just been asked to leave, just been asked to go. And he's going to fulfill and grant that request to the villagers. He can't stay himself. But the second reason that he doesn't allow the man to go is that this man is now a disciple, and he's now an evangelist. And Jesus tells him to go home and tell how much the Lord has done for him. As I've already said, when you encounter God, which we do here through the Bible, through spoken worship, through sung worship, through prayerful worship, and through allowing the Holy Spirit to move, you'll never be the same. If you reject Christ time and time and time again, then you become more and more apathetic and more defensive to the things of God and to God himself. But when you submit, you're transformed. And not only you're transformed, you're commissioned to go and to tell people about this encounter you have had with Christ. You're commissioned to tell people about Jesus himself, and you're commissioned to tell people about Jesus' authority over sin, Jesus' authority over nature, Jesus' authority over demons, and as we'll look at next week, Jesus' authority over sickness and death. When you have this encounter with Jesus, you become a minister of reconciliation between Jesus and other people. And that's what this man became. He had no theological degree. He possibly had no other knowledge of Jesus other than the encounter he had with him and the authority that he saw in him. But verse 20 tells us that he began to proclaim in the Decapolis. That just means the 10 cities. Jesus then goes back to the Decapolis in Mark chapter 7. And when he goes back, he's asked to heal a deaf man. How did the people know Jesus had the power to do that? How did people know Jesus had the power to heal? It's very possible that it's through this man's evangelism. This man had a story to tell, and he was telling it. What's your story? What story do you have to tell about your encounter with Jesus that could speak life into death, that could speak light into the darkness? What is your story? David Howard wrote this: God has not called a spiritual elite to carry out the work of the ministry, bypassing the ordinary believer in the church. God has called every single one of us to this ministry, to work in our own ministry, in our own ministry area. You see, it's not about what you know. It's not about how much you know. It's about who you know. It's about Jesus Christ. It always has been, and it always will be. But it's important to remember that whenever you go and tell your story, that these spiritually evil forces, they're not going to like that. And they're going to attack. But Paul reminds us in Ephesians chapter 6 to put on the armor of God. We need to clothe ourselves in the protection that God gives us. We need to clothe ourselves in Jesus Christ, and we need to clothe ourselves in his authority as we go and we tell our stories. But the question is, what's your response today to encountering Jesus? Do you want Jesus to leave, having nothing to do with him, or you having nothing to do with you want him to have nothing to do with you? Or is your response of complete and total submission to Christ, because he wants to transform your life? He wants to release you from anything that's been oppressing you, and he wants to do that today. That verse in John chapter 10, verse 10 didn't finish where I finished it. The thief comes to kill and to steal and to destroy. But I, Jesus Christ, has come to give life, and to give life in all its fullness.